Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another pro audio lesson. I am your resident pal, Michael Oskam, here to share everything and anything that I happen to know about mixing and producing and songwriting and all of the stuff that we love. Share as much of that knowledge that I've obtained over the years with you. I had this really interesting idea not too long ago. I was thinking about first of all, a little backstory. So I've been working in pro audio for a long time. I went to school for it back in the late 2000s, like 2011 ish, and was working in it before then, but then decided to go to school for it and see what I didn't know, which ended up being quite a bit. And then I worked in the studio system for a while, and now any of you who followed my channel for a while know that so I produce my own music, other bands, mix, master, all that kind of stuff. And I like to share techniques and just cool stuff with you guys. But you may not know that as of about almost 2 years ago, my wife and I moved across country from Southern California to Indiana, Fort Wayne specifically. I've been working with Sweetwater as a sales engineer with a primary focus in the areas that I know a lot about. So pro audio, mixing, producing, software, hardware, guitar, um, bass. I'm pretty much everything, right? But I have a lot of customers who are pro audio customers, and so I love helping them out. This channel is kind of an extension of that. It's kind of become that at this point. I haven't made a lot of videos lately because I've been able to kind of scratch that itch, so to speak, to help just through my everyday job. But I realized the power of the internet, the power of YouTube, and the ability to reach more people and help more people still. So I'm diving back into it full steam ahead, which is great. So you guys should see a lot of videos coming out on this channel coming up. Subscribe if you haven't already, all that good stuff. But I thought it would be interesting to talk about something. I came up with this idea while I was having a conversation with a customer. Um, and the idea is you guys know that, well, back in the day, the only way to record an album back in the day, right? The 90s, 80s, 70s was to go into an album, 2-inch tape, typically, very high end consoles, the whole thing. Obviously, the technological advancements that happened made it so computers, Pro Tools in particular, was the DAW of choice, and still is to some extent through today, although there's certainly been some makeup in that market share by Logic and Ableton and all of those. Studio One even, which is a great DAW. Anyway, um, the point was is you had to use all of the gear because that's how you did it. You had a console, you had outboard compressors and reverb units and all of this stuff. Nowadays, we work with plugins, and a lot of producers, a lot of studios have gone out of business because smaller project studios can be had and run. And so the question really becomes, how different is your home studio from a professional recording studio? Very different, you would think. But how different is it in the application of its use? That is actually the tricky part. So, as I worked in pro audio back in the day, in a studio, I guess I should say, a professional studio, downtown LA, worked with saw a lot of big artists come through there. Was happy to help assist engineer on a lot of those. It was great. But what I always found to be so interesting, and I never see this talked about, is how little of the gear in the studio is being used. Um, and so, if you kind of know the details about that, you know how to replicate the same results in your own studio space. And more specifically, if you're going to be investing money in gear, what specifically you should be investing in to get your records as close to what you're hearing. Um, Many of you would maybe not, but I think a lot of you would be surprised to learn that people don't run audio necessarily through the console anymore. Not as much as you would think. Um, Maybe a single channel, but not always. What the console is primarily used for in tracking sessions. I mean, unless we're talking about like a big band production, but I'm talking like pop music, um, and singer songwriter stuff. They are typically using a mic running into a high end mic pre outboard mic pre. into maybe a compressor, maybe an EQ, and then into a good A to D converter, into a laptop or the computer that's there running, usually Pro Tools. Okay. And that's it. Okay. So when it comes to producing, I can't tell you how many times producing and recording, I can't tell you how many times I went into the studio and they had a MIDI keyboard, much like the ones I have and you have, and a laptop, and then they were simply usually using some sort of small interface, maybe an Apollo or an Apogee of some sort, and they would be running the audio from their interface into the console. So the console, no joke, is essentially a big volume knob. And of course, the speakers in there sound great and the room is tuned, so that's something to keep in consideration. But they're not really running audio through the console. They're not getting that console sound. Most, if not all, of the processing is being done by plugins. Very rarely will they patch in some sort of outboard 1176 or LA2A or CL1 because time is of the essence. They're paying a lot of money to be there. They can move quicker and with plugins and such. And when they leave and go home, they can still access and get recreate the same sounds, mix at home, that kind of stuff. So paying to go into a studio, why would you do it then? It really only makes a difference if you need the space. If you're recording a live band and you have drums, a full drum set, and you want access to their mic locker, and you want be able to work in isolation booth, so maybe you can track at the same time. Those are reasons to go into a recording studio. But many of the projects, self-produced projects, solo artist projects, these types of things today can be produced at a home studio using the exact same setup that you would find, at least gear-wise, inside of a professional high-end, $400, $500, $800 an hour type studios. Crazy, right? Like I always thought, hey, if I'm going to be paying a lot of money to go, or my label or whatever, ultimately, as we know about advancements, it's always the artist that ends up paying anyway. If I'm going to be paying large amounts of money to record and put out a record, I'm going to want to take full advantage of all the gear that's there. Obviously, I mean, I want to hear it. But that's just not the mindset anymore. Business is kind of overtaken. It's always been part business, part art form, and especially in the pop world, as I'm not saying anything you don't know, business is overtaken art a lot of the time. Doesn't mean it has to be that way for you, but what's good to know is you can find pieces of gear through Sweetwater. Come to me, I'll help you out, or maybe in the used marketplace. Sweetwater has a used marketplace as well. I'm not trying to push Sweetwater, just saying you can find gear that is the same as being used in high-end studios. You can use it in your own home studio and you can get the same results. A DAW is a DAW is a DAW. I'm not saying you have to use Pro Tools. Most people do still, but maybe not most. That market share, if I'm saying most, it's barely most. It's like 55%. The other half has been taken up, like I said, by Logic and Ableton and Studio One and Cubase and a few others. Bitwig is making a little bit of a market share grab. Interesting times, right? So the DAW doesn't matter so much, but the hardware gear. So the most common mic that I saw used in my years there at the studio, which I won't name, is the Sony, right? The C800. It is a $10,000 microphone, and it has a very, very present top end, just naturally the way the capsule is designed. It's a tube mic, but it has a very, very clear and present top end, which makes it really good for vocals, obviously, but in particular vocals of pop or a hip hop or rap, because you get the articulation from that natural bump in the top end. Let me show you this mic, just so you can see. In case I'm assuming most of you know what I'm talking about, but there we go. So this is the Sony C800 large diaphragm condenser. Very famous mic, was used all the time. I would say 99% of the time, 95% of the time I saw this. Occasionally they would switch it out for something like a C12 or maybe like a U47. But by and large, this mic was always up on the stand in the vocal booth in Studio A, ready to go. So that's a very expensive mic. Can't really afford that. I can't. A lot of people can't. Well, Warm Audio makes the um, 8000, which is a very similar mic. I've heard it. It looks similar. Obviously, it's a clone. I've heard it. It sounds very similar, and it is a tenth of the cost. So there you go. You could afford that, or at least it's a lot more affordable. You could also go with something. Speaking of Warm Audio, this is also a very good mic, the 251. Again, more of a discount on this one. Fantastic mic. It's a emulation of a Telefunken 251, and again, a very good vocal mic. Fantastic sounding microphone. This is a great emulation. Warm Audio does really good stuff. I'm not paid to say that, by the way. I really just believe it. And then, hey, maybe that's a little too much. Sometimes you can use something like the virtual mic set from Slate. Or if you have a little more money, the new used to be, I guess, owned by a different company. Now it's Universal Audio, their Sphere microphone. But here, right now, you can get the Slate virtual microphone system on sale for $500, and then it has a C800 emulation. So you can get the same sounds. Then I mentioned that they're usually running it through some sort of mic pre. So you could do something like a 1073 from Neve, or you could do something like a lesser known, like a Golden Age is a brand that I really like. Chameleon is a brand that's really good. These kinds of things, less expensive. You can run it through, get a nice analog sounding mic pre. I'm not going to talk about Universal Audio because not everybody has Universal Audio. However, you could run Universal Audio emulations in the same sense. Let me switch back. I use Universal Audio. So like here, this is where my vocal's coming in, but I have access to all sorts of stuff, right? I could run the Neve 88RS or the 1073 or the 1084. Those are really popular. And then I could also run the Softube CL1B. That's a really famous compressor. So you can do a lot of these things via hardware or software if you have the Apollo stuff. Not saying you have to get that, but if you're looking to upgrade, what I recommend for your home recording, what I recommend is get something that's often called a golden channel. And it can be one or two channels. It's typically one for vocals, maybe acoustic guitars, that kind of stuff, or electric guitar cabinet, whatever. It's a golden, or bass. It's a golden channel is what it's typically called. And it's a single channel of just really as high end as you can afford stuff, getting the best sound, the best bang for the buck. And it's a single channel. If you're a home producer and you work solo, you are like me, you typically are recording one thing at a time. And so you're layering things. And if you have a golden channel, which you can build for relatively inexpensive, at least inexpensively compared to some of the other stuff that I've talked about, that's a really good way to go. And you're on the exact same level as the people in the high-end studios because they are not taking advantage. Now, I understand this is a blanket generalization. Obviously, there are exceptions. But by and large, most people that I saw go into the studio, most artists, most producers, they are using software, plugins, and very little hardware, and very rarely utilize the consoles and all of the outboard rack gear that they have there, which I found to be surprising. And I thought it would be nice to explain to you guys. So the playing field has leveled. It's great for everybody. It's affordable now, and there are a lot of good alternatives and clones and things out there that can fit any sort of budget. So, a little shameless plug, hit me up. I can give you the best discount I can. Just ask for Michael Oskam if you call into Sweetwater. My extension is actually 3555 3555, so hit me up. But nevertheless, just keep that in mind. What separates amateurs from pros is really production value in terms of decisions that you make, sound choices, sample choices, and then production in terms of like vocal and layering and all of those stuff. These creative decisions are what really make the difference between pro level and amateur level stuff. The good news is you can improve at that stuff over time with practice. And if you trust me, I'd more than happy to show you, like I said, everything I know. You can follow this channel, and I will give you great tips on things that I've learned and seen done by some of the biggest names in the game. So thank you so much for stopping by. I was a little bit more long-winded than I had intended, but I think you guys ultimately see where I'm coming from. I thank you so much. More videos coming, and keep mixing. Keep doing your thing.